Hi, everyone. Today we are going to talk about how to find the percents of numbers, and we're specifically going to be working on IXL EXE, which does contain some real world problems and scenarios. So, a couple quick reminders before we get going here. If we look on the left here, whenever we are dealing with percentages, we need to convert that percentage to a fraction or a decimal before we work with it. I typically prefer to convert it to a decimal. I find that easier to work with. So remember that the way we convert a decimal to a percent is technically through dividing by 100. But a little shortcut that works all of the time is dividing by 100 is the same thing as moving that decimal point two places to the left. So in this example here, 27 and 5/10%. If we move that decimal point two places to the left, here we have 0 and 275 thousandths. That would be that same number, just written as a true decimal. And then if we look on the right here, when we're trying to find the percent of a number, it doesn't really matter what the scenario is, whether it's just the, percentage of that information that we're given from a data or from some sort of graph, or if we're dealing with a real world scenario like tax or tip or coupons, anything like that. When we want to find the percent of a number, we do so by multiplication. So we can see here the first step is they took that 35% and they divided by 100. Another way to do that is move the decimal point two places to the left to convert the percentage to a decimal. Here we have 0 and 35 hundredths. Then you multiply that by whatever you're trying to find the percent of, which would be 80, giving us the answer of 28. So 35% of 80 would be 28. All right, let's head on over to IXL so we can actually practice this ourselves and look at it through the lens of some real world scenarios and problems. All right, here we are on IXL. Remember the code is EXE, percents of numbers word problems. And don't forget that IXL has some helpful things for you as well. You can click on this to learn with an example, or you can watch a video that IXL has made. Those are always really good too. So for our first problem here, it says the lunch choices last Friday were mushroom or pepperoni pizza. The cafeteria made 92 pizzas in all, 75% of which were mushroom pizzas. How many mushroom pizzas did the cafeteria make? So I can see here that there are a total of 92 pizzas that were made, 75% of which were topped with mushroom. And we are specifically being asked to find out what number is that. How many exact pizzas is that 75%? So we want to find out what 75% of 92 is. So our first step is we need to convert. We need to change 75% into a decimal so we can deal with that. Remember, you are dividing by 100, otherwise known as just moving that decimal point two places to the left, giving us an equivalent version of 75% as a decimal that is 0 and 75 hundredths. And if we want to know how many pizzas are mushroom, what 75% of 92 is we are going to do that through multiplication. So we will multiply the 0 and 75 hundredths by 92. I'm going to come off to the side over here and do that. I will work this first one out long ways. Oops. Remember, when you are multiplying with decimals, you temporarily ignore that decimal point. They don't need to be lined up or anything like that when you're multiplying with decimals. You just multiply like normal, and then at the very end is when we'll deal with the decimal point. So first, 5 times 2 is 10. Bring down the 0 and carry the 1. And then 5 times 9 is 45, plus 1 is 46. Before we multiply things by 7, since we're moving over a spot, we're moving over a place value, remember that you need to add a 0 to shift yourself over there as well. It just kind of works as a placeholder, so you don't get your numbers, unorganized and not lined up. So now we can do 7 times 2, which is 14. Carry the 1, bring down the 4. And then we have 7 times 9, which is 63, plus 1 is 64. We're still not going to worry about the decimal point yet. Go ahead and add these up. 0 plus 0, 6 plus 4 is 10, 4 plus 4 is 8, plus 1 is 9, and then bring down your 6. Now is when we're going to deal with that decimal point. When you're multiplying with decimals, you look at your original problem and you add up how many digits follow the decimal point, or another way of saying that is how many digits, how many numbers are to the right of your decimal point, and that's how many need to be to the right of the decimal point in your answer. So in this first number here, we don't have any numbers to the right of our decimal point, but in this second number, we have 2. So that means in my final answer, we need 2 numbers after the decimal point, which would just give us 69. So 75% of 92 is 69. So that means there were 69 pizzas that were made with the topping of mushrooms. All right, let's try number 2. The 6th graders at Tim's school got to choose between a field trip to a museum and a field trip to a factory. 90% of the 6th graders picked the museum. If there are 80 6th graders in all at Tim's school, how many 6th graders went on the trip to the museum? All right, so if we look at our information here, we know that 90% of the people picked to go to the museum. Oops, that's a bad underline. There we go. There are a total of 80 6th graders, and our question is we want to know how many of those 6th graders actually picked the museum. We want that exact number, not just the percent of them that went. So first step is let's convert that 90% into a decimal. We can do so by dividing by 100, which is the same thing as moving that decimal point 2 places to the left, which would give us 0 and 90 hundredths. But whenever you just have a trail of zeros at the end of your decimal, you are allowed to drop that. So another way that can be written is just 0 and 9/10. And if we want to know what 90% is of the 86 graders, we are going to do that through multiplication. I'll show one more problem where we multiply long ways, and then after that, we will skip that portion of it. But just in case you need to see that again. So remember, when you're multiplying with decimals, you don't need to line up the decimal point at all. You just multiply like normal, and then we'll come back to it in a moment. So 9 times 0 is 0, and then 9 times 8 is 72. No other digits, so we don't need to do any more multiplication, which means we're ready for that decimal point. And our first number here, the 80, we don't have any digits. We don't have any numbers that are to the right of our decimal point. And our second number here, we have one number. We have one digit to the right. meaning in our answer, we need to have one digit to the right of the decimal point, giving us the answer of 72. So 72 of the sixth graders chose that museum trip. All right, let's bump it up a notch here, have slightly larger numbers that we're dealing with. The library owns 605 books. 40% of the books are fiction books. How many fiction books does the library own? So 40% are fiction. There are a total of 605 books, and we want to know the exact number. So we want to know what 40% of 605 is. So first off, 40% as a decimal would be equal to 0 and 4/10. Convert that percentage to a decimal so we can work with it. Now we can multiply our 605 books by our 0 and 4/10. And when we do that, we get the answer of 242. So there are 242 fiction books in that library. 40% of 605 is 242. All right, let's do one more example here together. And this is a really good one. It's a little different than others we've seen. Not much though. So there are 960 houses in Stephen's hometown. Last summer, 5% of the houses were for sale. How many houses were for sale last summer? So we have a total of 960 houses. 5% were for sale, and we want to know that exact number that were for sale. We want to know what 5% of 960 is. So first step is to convert that 5% into a decimal. Now this is the one part that's just a little different from the rest, because that 5% is just one single number. But to turn a percent into 100, remember we need to move the decimal point twice. We are still going to do that because percent is per 100. And an easy way that I like to remember that is when you're out of per 100, the 100 has 2 zeros, so we're moving that decimal point 2 times. So it's going to still be moved 2 times. But in order for our decimal point to land right here, we need a little placeholder, which of course would be a adding in of a 0. So 0.05 is the decimal equivalent, is the decimal version of 5%. So just be careful whenever you get numbers like that you still remember to move that decimal point 2 places and you add a 0 in if necessary. Now the rest is the same. We want to know what 5% of 960 is. We're going to take 960 and multiply that by 0.05. And we get the answer of 48. So there were 48 houses for sale last summer. All right, it's now your guys' turn to try it. I believe you can do a great job on this, but if you still have some questions, make sure to check out that video by IXL, or of course, you could always search YouTube or any other, or the internet for other videos or other examples as well. But hopefully this clears things up. If not, make sure to reach out to your teacher and ask for help. Bye, guys.